All right. I think I can go ahead and just move stream over to the setup. Hello. So I'm checking. I kept trying to move my mouse over to the right as if my Mac was part of my PC setup. I don't think anyone else is watching right now, but I will go ahead and post the link to Twitter and one other Discord server. I'm not even logged in on Twitter, Jesus. I don't use this computer often enough. Hang on. Okay, screw Twitter. Okay, hang on. Let me do self-promotion in here. We live. And I'll do it in this server as well if there's a place for it. Yay. Well, hang on. Self-promotion. Stream promo. There we go. Boy. Paste. There we go. All right. I put the stream in a couple friend servers. I don't know if anyone's going to see it. But hopefully. Hello, Aaron. How you doing, Krieg? Yeah. So today we have a stream that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, because the only reason it took me as long as it did to get to this stream is that I have been incredibly busy for the first part of this year, much more so than I wanted to be, and I'm very happy that I'm finally out of the part of my life where I don't have any time to stream. I don't know if I'm going to keep my stream schedule perfectly the way I want to, but I'm going to try and do this every Monday and every Thursday if I can. This stream is one I've been looking forward to for a very long time. I am ranking every book that I read in 2023. Now you may say to yourself, Ari, this is a lot of books, Ari. Why did you read all 66 of these books? The answer is no, I read 58 of them, which is still a fuck ton, but it's not as many as I might have otherwise. So I'm gonna rank all of these, and I have a few different places to rank them. You get typical S, A, B, C. These are normal rankings. If something is triple S, then it's one of my favorite books of all time. If it's a will not reread, then it's something that I liked enough to finish, but that I did not really have any desire to go back for again. If it's a DNF already read, it's a book that I did not finish, but that I've already finished before this, so it doesn't really matter much. If it's a DNF, we'll try again. It's a book that I just wasn't in the mood for, but that I think I might go for again someday. And if it's a DNF and will not, then it's a book I did not finish and don't plan to. I think there's only one book on this whole list that falls into this category, but I also didn't have very many DNFs, so that's part of it. Now, the reason I got through so many of these is because I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and audiobooks are wonderful. I love them. This is not a sponsored segment. I have 100 subscribers. That is not fucking happening. But I will strongly recommend for anyone who likes books but feels like they cannot afford to constantly buy them, or who feels like they don't have time to read physical books. Audiobooks are great. There's an app called Libby, and it's what I use to listen to a lot of books these days. It is a library-connected app. You basically go get a library card from your local library. You scan your library card on the app, and Libby gives you access to a bunch of digital copies of basically any audiobook that you could find a physical book of at your library. There are instances where a book will not be available, and unfortunately, the more niche titles are harder to find on there. But it's a cool app because you don't have to pay for it. And I've listened to a lot of books that either I couldn't find on certain platforms, like Brandon Sanderson's Secret Projects, which only just got released to Audible this year, or a lot of books that I just didn't want to pay for because I didn't know for sure I'd like them, or books when I was poor and couldn't afford to buy anymore, through Libby, just by borrowing them. So honestly, couldn't recommend it enough. It's not a sponsored segment. I just genuinely like that app, and I want people to know about it because I feel like a lot of people only don't listen or read books because they don't want to pay for them, and it's not as hard to afford them as you think if you're using Libby because it's free. But yeah, so we're gonna start because if you're not here already, then whatever. Anyway, whatever. If no one shows up, I can still use this for like trimmed material for a video. So I'm gonna go out of order sometimes because even though I had all these really well ordered in the folder that all these images were in, a lot of these now are out of order because the tier list website sucks. And a lot of them that I had perfectly ordered in series order from beginning to finish have been just completely fucking reworked. And I'm annoyed, and I'm angry about it, but whatever. So we're going to start with something I constantly saw people talking about in queer circles, The Song of Achilles. This book is basically a retelling, I'm going to put this back here for a second, a retelling of the Iliad, through the perspective of not Achilles, but through the side character Patroclus, who in this book is Achilles' gay lover. And it's quite a good book. It's quite a good book. I will say I had problems with it. I enjoyed the story. I thought it was very well written, and the narrator was excellent. That being said, I did not enjoy how sexual this book was. Y'all know me. I can be down bad sometimes, but I am not a massive fan of when a book spends an inordinate amount of time on sex scenes when the reason I'm reading it is for wholesome reasons or because I just like the story. I wanted to read this because I like Greek mythology and because I like Achilles. I did not read this because I was interested in adult times, especially considering that the characters are underage for a good chunk of the story, and that kind of took me out of it. I thought it was a decent book. I'll put it in will not reread, because I won't. It was good. I'm glad I finished it. It's a good story. I don't think I'll ever go back to this one. Then you may notice that a huge chunk of these books are Brandon Sanderson novels. I promise I normally read more like other authors than this. However, the reason such a massive percentage of these books are Brandon Sanderson books is because last year is when I really started reading Brandon Sanderson, and I have a tendency to, if I read one book by an author I like, start going through everything they've ever written. Sanderson has written a lot of goddamn books, and because of that, I spent a huge chunk of last year just going through each and every one of his books one by one. I started with the entire Cosmere, and I read Alcatraz vs. the Evil Librarians, and I had read the first book of that a long time ago, but I had not read the whole series before, because I had the first audiobook, but I never bothered reading the later ones when I was a kid. Now I've read the entire series, all 6 books. So I'm going to start by ranking one of his series at a time in between other books. And hopefully we'll get through all of them as we go. So we're going to start with Alcatraz. Alcatraz vs. the Evil Librarians is a 6-book long series. It is middle grade, but it is very good middle grade. It's a book about a kid named Alcatraz who is, unbeknownst to him, the child of 2 very important people in a hidden society unknown to the majority of the world. And it turns out that that society is very technologically advanced, and that all their technology is based on sand, and that the librarians across the world, they're all evil, and they're running this secret society to withhold technology and cinematics from the real world and regular people, and there's a war going on, and it's kind of cool, and it's funny. This book is very funny. Alcatraz vs. the Evil Librarians has a very good sense of humor, and honestly, it's right up my alley. Both of the narrators do a good job. They had a separate narrator for the original version of the first book, and the later version was narrated by a different narrator who would do the entire series. The first book is a solid read. I would rank it in B tier. Nothing too special, very good book, good setups and payoffs. I love the characters. That's a big reason why I like Sanderson books. He's an excellent character writer. Second one, Scrivener's Bones. I thought this one... I think I'd put it in the same place. I, in general, liked a lot of the early... honestly, I liked all the Alcatraz books. With that being said, I feel like the second one, I'm trying to remember what exactly happens. So they go to the Library of Alexandria, and there's a whole big subplot about different types of librarians and like a specific bounty hunter that's on the chase of them. You know what? Scrivener's Bones gets to be above the first one. I'm not ranking these really, but if I was, I'd rank Scrivener's Bones above the first one. It has some very cool set pieces in it now that I actually think about it. Um, and also some very interesting expansions upon the magic system, specifically with one character whose power is to get lost. And that's the running thing in this series, that everybody has a magical power in this guy's family, but they're all powers that sound useless on the surface. The main character's power is to break things. There is a grandfather whose power is to arrive late to things, which sounds stupid and horrible, right? Until you realize that he can arrive late to death, and that's kind of a lot more powerful than people think it is. So that's a pretty good power system. I like it a lot. Knights of Crystalia, if I remember right, might have been my favorite book in the series. I think Crystalia is an A tier, if I remember right. I'm trying to remember what specifically happens in this book. So then after the second book, it's a lot about Bastille, who's the female lead of this book. This entire series, really. She eventually gets a book named after her. The third book is, I'm trying to remember, but I think this is one of my favorites in the series. I can't say a whole lot else about it, though, because I've been so brain work over time-id lately. I do remember the climax has some very interesting parts, and I won't spoil it. No spoilers for any of these if I can avoid it. But Knights of Crystalia is a very good book. I like that one a lot. Shattered Lens is the fourth book. And I think I remember this one being a little too much. I'm putting this one in C tier. Actually, I remember what happened in the third one now. That's still an A tier. That is my favorite book in the series. The fourth book, though, got pretentious in a lot of places. And it's still a good read, and I will probably revisit it for the sake of the Alcatraz series. But Alcatraz as a narrator, because this entire series is written in the first person, is kind of pretentious as a rule, and that's kind of one of his running characteristics. Book 4 gets very in your face about it, and there are parts of that I don't mind, there are parts of that I think are funny, but it gets very obnoxious in this book. Yeah, there are parts of it I'm not a huge fan of and that I don't enjoy very much. The Dark Talent. I am hovering between A and B tier on this. I'm putting it in B tier above book 2. I guess I am ranking these individually, but book 5 is very good. It's hard for me to talk about the specifics of the book without spoiling it, but I will say that it is a very powerful book. It has some very interesting spots, and it's one of the books where a lot of the things you've been expecting from the beginning finally start coming together. That being said, the ending is very abrupt, and it is that way by design. Whether you like that or not is going to determine how you feel about this book, I think. In my case, I didn't mind it, but I didn't love it either. I thought it was okay. I understood what it was going for. I didn't think it was done perfectly. That being said, book 5, top of B tier, I think that's safe for it. Book 6, Bastille versus the Evil Librarians. I think this book is probably among the best in the series. I like this book a lot. I would say that Knights of Crystalia is better than it. But I'm also just a sucker for a good ending, and it is a very good ending. And also, this book is, I think, co-narrated by the guy who did the original narrations, plus this one is named after Bastille, so it's not a spoiler to say that, yeah, there's a female narrator for Bastille, and she does a very good job. I like her a lot. I really enjoyed hearing her voice at the end of book 5, in addition to at the beginning of this. So yeah, I really enjoyed Bastille vs. the Evil Librarians. I thought it was a great end to the series. And finding out about some of the behind the scenes stuff with how the series was on hold for so long, and then Brandon brought it back, and a different author helped him to finish book 6, and it was very cool. I like it a lot, and I'm a huge fan of this series overall. All right, let's talk about a couple different books. So, Baraska. This is kind of a fan cover, and if I do make a video out of this, then I will make sure to credit the artist who did this fan cover. But this is a creepypasta online series, and it is a horror series. It is a very, very, very good horror series. And Mr. Creepypasta has a narrated version of it online that I think you should definitely listen to. It's difficult to talk about any of the specific plot details without spoiling it, because a big part of Baraska is around trying to figure out what kind of story it is. That being said, Baraska is a very atmospheric, very powerful character piece, and it's one of the best creepypastas I've ever listened to. And I've listened to a lot of creepypastas. You'll see another couple of them later on the list, kind of. Baraska is an S tier for me. It is a very, very good story. In fact, I'm tempted to put it in triple S. You know what? I'm gonna put it in triple S. Because I've listened to it so many times at this point, I don't think it could be anywhere but in one of my favorites. I don't listen to a lot of horror as a rule, but considering that this is a creepypasta, it has no right to be as good as it is. And I am very fond of that story, and I will always recommend it to people who have a stomach for those kind of stories, because it is, although it is brutal, and it is a very, very gut-wrenching story in places, it is one of my favorite creepypastas of all time. It's split into the original 4 parts, which are themselves about a novel's length, and Baraska 5, which is as long as the first 4 parts combined, pretty much. I consider them all one story. I don't think either one is complete without the other for context. So I'm going to rank them all as one. Baraska gets to be in triple S. So the next thing is going to be 3 of the Charlie Bone books. If you've never heard of Charlie Bone, it's basically Harry Potter, but if it was written by someone who isn't extremely problematic now. It's a British boarding school book series. And guess what? There's magic! But that magic is nowhere near the soft magic system that Rowling has. It's more of like characters have different gifts, and they have one specific magic power, and that power is exclusively theirs, and no one else really has anything like their powers. It's very different because it's not like Blor's Academy, the school that everybody goes to in this book, is a school for magic users. And it's not like it's a school that is like magical like Hogwarts is. It's not a great place to be or anything. It's just a school that all the few people who happen to have the abilities of the Red King happen to go to. Because it's a place where they're often encouraged to go, so they're all in the same place. I like it a lot. I grew up with these books. I still have hardcovers of them. And I did not read all of them last year. I read the first 3. But I kind of ran out of time halfway through through Castle of Mirrors. I don't know if I tried to read that this year or last year. I didn't put that on my DNFs list. I probably should have. I remember hearing about these books, but I was deep in the Harry Potter rabbit hole. Yeah, you're not the only one, and I've heard that from other people too. These are good. If you ever want to give them a chance, they are good. It's surreal because some of the audiobooks have stingers at the end from, what's his name? God, the narrator who did Harry Potter, but some of them have a stinger from that guy, and he's like, did you know that audiobooks are good for your children? Or I don't know, I'm terrible with a British accent, don't judge me. But I'm putting the first one, Midnight, for Charlie Bone. I'll put it in B tier. It's right up there with the first couple of Alcatraz books. I think it's good, and very creative, and it's also very, very British. It makes Harry Potter look American by comparison, but Time Twister is probably... I can't decide if it's bottom of A tier or top of B tier. Very good book, though. I think Time Twister was my favorite of the 3 that I read. I'll put it in top of B tier. And Blue Boa, I'll put right there with the first book. But basically, these are all mystery books. Never got into audiobooks as a kid, only now listening to them recently because of work. Yeah, I feel like as an adult it becomes a lot more convenient because you have so much time where your ears are not occupied, but the rest of you is. And that's kind of how I read a lot of these books last year because I was driving so much. Between my multiple road trips and like work and stuff. But Midnight for Charlie Bone is a very good story. It feels like it's only the first story. And that's both a good and a bad thing in the sense that it establishes a lot of stuff and it's very cool, but it hasn't really gotten moving yet. Time Twister has, I think, the best climax of the three that I read, and it also just has very good character work across the board, and I like some of the different plot changes that are made, or plot twists that are made in this book. Blue Boa has very good setups and payoffs. I would not say that I like it as much as the second book. I like it as much as the first book for sure, but the second is better, and I'm unwilling to put this above the first two Alcatraz books for me. But these are all solid books. All right, it's time for another Sanderson book. We have Elantris, or whatever the hell you want to call it. I've listened to multiple audio versions of Elantris and related books, and this book has no consistency in which companies pronounce the name which way. So I'm saying Elantris because the 10th anniversary audiobook, which is the one that I own, pronounced it Elantris. However, some later stories, like The Hope of Elantris, pronounced it Elantris. And it's kind of frustrating, and I wish that they would do that better. But Elantris gets a solid B tier. It is a very good fantasy book. However, it is flawed. It is heavily flawed. I am putting it in B tier because the imagination and the creativity that Sanderson puts into his worlds, into his characters, and into his magic systems is so freaking good. And Elantris is no exception. This book is no exception, okay? The magic is really cool, the setting is really cool, and this has one of my favorite antagonists in any Sanderson book. But I will say that it's very clear that Sanderson was new to writing books, or at least publishing books, in Elantris. And this is a rougher story than some of his later ones. It's cool because the 10th anniversary version has some deleted scenes and alternate versions of existing scenes. There's a whole plot line that got taken out of the final version of the book that's present in the end bits of the anniversary version that you can listen to, and that's really cool. And the narrator's good. I like the narrator. But I will say that Elantris is a B tier because it feels, especially the pacing is rough in places. It's very slow. But I like it a lot. I'm at least putting it in B tier. I do not feel like it deserves C tier, but it's not as high up as some of these later stories. Pronunciation is a big pet peeve of mine too. It's why I can't always listen to Elantris and its subsequent stories next to each other because they don't pronounce all the names the same way. Okay. Non-Sanderson book. The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. I'm not even going to entertain other rankings. This is a triple S tier. Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein is genuinely one of the best books I've ever read. I love it. It's phenomenal. I took a chance on it because it was free and available on Libby, and I do not regret it. This book, genuinely one of my favorites ever. It is a retelling of the events of Frankenstein through the perspective of his betrothed, Elizabeth. And it is very faithful to the original book, but still takes enough liberties to be interesting. And it's honestly one of the coolest, like, Frankenstein-related books I've ever seen. I love some of the ways this story interprets the lore of Frankenstein. Dark Descent, top 3 books I read last year, being real. Loved it. I didn't describe the plot of Elantris, did I? People get sick with magical sickness that used to make them strong but now makes them weak. mystery about it. There's a villain who's a priest. Good book, very good book. Moving on. So, the next series I'm going to talk about is the Fire Queen's Apprentice trilogy, which is not the first set of books in this series. I have read Steel and Fire, which is the 5-book series that comes before this. I'm pointing with my fingers like you can see them. But I only reread these 3 books last year. Technically, while I had read the majority of the Dragonfly Oath, which is book 3, before that, I had not finished it because I kept losing my place in the last few chapters and I just gave up after a while. But I had read both Watermite Thief and Thunderbird Queen before that, and I loved this series, and I gave them all a shot again, and I quite enjoyed them. So I will not describe a lot of the story because these are books 6, 7, and 8, respectively, in their series, but they are also kind of their own independent trilogy, so yeah. I'll describe just enough. The Watermite Thief is a book about a street girl named Tamri. In this world, there are elemental magics. There is the fire, there is the water, there is the air, and Tamri is what we call a Watermite artist, who has the ability to use Watermite, which is the silvery substance that comes out of vents in the ground below water level. And they're super cool. I love the magic in this series. It's all element-based, but only specific versions of the elements. You have to have Watermite to use water magic. You can't just use regular water for it. And it's cool, because there's an entire economy and, like, political system set up in this universe based around the barter and trade of the different things that fire and Watermite can do. And one of the massive conflicts of this story is fire and Watermite being traded between nations. Basically, Tamri steals Watermite from the government and gets caught and gets into this agreement where in order to appease the people she stole from, she has to agree to be part of a new experimental magic academy that one of the main characters of the previous book series is setting up. And book 1 is a very good story. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I love Tamri as a protagonist. She's much more interesting than a lot of other fantasy protagonists, in my opinion, just because she has more defined motives and more grounded character motivations. Watermite Thief is a solid A tier, and I would put that above Bastille. I like it quite a lot. And Thunderbird Queen, again, really, really good book. I think that this is probably right up there with the first one. The Thunderbird Queen is another story from following the same characters, but it basically hints at a whole bunch of new magic system stuff. And it's really cool what they do with the new magic stuff that they're introducing in this book. That being said, it's very difficult to explain a lot of this stuff without inherently spoiling it, and I'm trying not to. So I would recommend you read this, but start with Steel and Fire, which is also good. Keep in mind, those books are very romance-oriented. This one has a romance, but it's less oriented around it. Sorry about that. But yeah, I like these quite a lot. Book 3 is, so far, the last book in the series. And I'd put it at top of B tier. In fact, I'd put it less than top. I'd put it probably right above Dark Talent. So Dragonfly Oath is a good story. It has parts that irritate me. Namely, I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a subplot that gets introduced that's way more interesting than a lot of the main plots that have been entertained. And then it very abruptly ends in this book, and it just feels like sequel bait, and I don't know if there is a sequel to this even being planned. I haven't checked on Jordan Rivett's stuff in a while. Maybe she is writing more of this book series, but it's been a few years since this came out, so who knows at this point. I will say Dragonfly Oath is still a very good story, but I don't like it as much as I like the first 2 books. Dragonfly Oath is a B tier, if you ask me. Very good story, great characters, still interesting magic system, Still interesting developments of the magic system too, but it is not, in my opinion, as solid as the first two stories are. All right, we'll handle another Sanderson thing just to get them out of the way. Infinity Blade. So this is a mobile game. Infinity Blade is a mobile game, and I didn't know that before I started reading these books. These are companion books that were that Brandon Sanderson wrote to go alongside the Infinity Blade games that I don't think he had anything to do with. The books are quite good. There are plot holes, and I don't think that they are perfectly introduced. I try to ignore them because these are, obviously companion books to a game that Sanderson has no power over. It's unfortunate because they are unfinished. I'm going to put them both in C tier. I might listen to them again someday. I enjoy these books. I thought they were good. They're also very digestible because they're very short and well-paced. But they're also inherently incomplete, and it's difficult for me to say that they are any better than that because, again, they're not a complete story. I do occasionally reference Awakening because it has some very good moments, but yeah, man, it's hard for me to recommend these any higher than this just because, again, they're not a complete series. Basically, it's about this protagonist. I think it's the protagonist from the first game, if I remember right. But he's a hero that was, destined to take up the Infinity Blade and try to... Or not take up the Infinity Blade, but, go fight the Dark King or whatever. I don't remember what it's called. It's been a while since I've read these. But he, before the story even begins, pulls it off. He kills the evil dude. And then he goes back to his hometown. And he's like, well, what the hell do I do now? And it's a very cool story because you get to watch this basically prophecy-fulfilled hero go through the motions of, well, shit, what comes next? And I found that very interesting, and I liked that quite a lot. I thought that made for a more interesting story. And there's elements throughout this series of technology as magic being hinted at, and I thought that was cool too. It gets developed very much in the second book, and I like the direction they headed in with that. Again, I just sort of wish that they had finished the book series instead of saying that you had to play the games, because now the mobile games don't even exist anymore, and you basically can't play the games now, I think. So if you want to know how the story ended, you just gotta look it up online, and I think that's not very satisfying. So C tier, good books, but they're not finished. Speaking of good books but not finished, Lies of Locke Lamora, the Gentleman Bastard series. This series is very dark. I don't recommend this for the faint of heart. There's a lot of very intense scenes in these books. I like them a lot, but I also have a stomach for these kinds of scenes that I don't think every reader is going to. I know a lot of friends who would probably hate these books just because they're too much. But Lies of Locke Lamora, I think this is the best of the 3 books that currently exist in the series. God. I think Lies of Locke Lamora is probably top of A tier. The book series is very smart, it's very funny, the characters are wonderful, and the narrator clearly loves his job. He's doing a fantastic job the entire time, and I really enjoyed how enthusiastic his voices were, and some of these characters, man, are so memorable. The eyeless priest is amazing. If you think eyeless is a name, it's not. It's eyeless. He doesn't have any eyes. He's blind. Except he's not, because he's, instead of being a proper priest of Paralandro, the god of charity, he is instead a priest of the unnamed 13th, who is the god of thieves, and he uses a church as the ultimate grift. And it's very, very funny and cool, and I love this book for that. Locke Lamora is quite good. I am unsure of whether to put Red Seas Under Red Skies above or below Locke Lamora. Because the thing is that Red Seas has some of my favorite parts of the trilogy so far. Red Seas has a lot of swashbuckling action and ship stuff, which I like quite a lot. You know what? Fuck it. Red Seas gets to be above Locke Lamora. I do like this book better. It's not by a lot, but I do really enjoy it. Uh, I think both of these books are really similar to each other in quality. I just think that Red Seas has potentially a bit more like going on story wise, because the story of the first book, while quite good, is also, again, it's a first book. It doesn't feel like it's going as far into this world as it probably could. I feel like book two goes significantly harder at that, and I like it for a lot of that. And I also really enjoy the ship stuff in this book. So Red Seas gets to be top tier. Um, Matter of fact, Red Seas is S tier. It gets to be S tier. Republic of Thieves. Oh, how do I feel about Republic of Thieves? This is a tough question because the thing is that Republic of Thieves is largely split into two stories. Um, it's split into the story of Locke and the gang when they were young, and the story of Locke and the gang as they are older now. And to be honest with you, I do not find that split super compelling. The third book has a lot of romance in it between two characters who I think are terrible for each other, and I just don't enjoy that very much. I think Republic of Thieves gets to be top of C tier because, like with the other books in this, I just have one glaring problem with it that really interrupts my enjoyment. Um, Now, if you're wondering why it's only 3 books, it's because the fourth book, as far as I'm aware, still isn't out and hasn't been announced a release date for it yet. The last book came out in like the early 2010s. We're never fucking getting a fourth book, are we? I really hope we do. Please, Scott Lynch, I would love a fourth book. Please, I want to know what happens. But yeah, the books are good. Unfortunately, there is no ending yet, and I don't enjoy that very much. Again, like I said with Infinity Blade, I wish there was an ending. Honestly, Republic of Thieves would probably be in B tier if it wasn't for the fact that the story just doesn't end. But yeah. Next thing we're going on to is Grog. This is a standalone book. It was self-published, and I like this book a lot. The unfortunate thing is, none of the later books have, like, proper audiobooks. And because I think the narrator does such a phenomenal job, and because I still think the character piece is good, even in spite of not having, like, not even in spite of the fact that I haven't finished the series because the later books only have AI audiobooks, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I will put this in low B tier. Good book. Let me take a drink of my water so I can tell you more about it. Okay. So, Grog, right? Quite love this book. I've listened to this many times. I would like this a lot more if the other books had proper audiobook adaptations. And unfortunately, I cannot stand the sound of AI voices, and I have a lot of trouble reading books physically. I do own a copy of Grog 2, and I've been meaning to get to it for a while, but I just haven't had the time to sit down and read stuff. Grog 1 is a story of this, in this world they're not called orcs, but that's a pretty similar analog, of a slave named Grog. And it's about his life as a slave trained for the pits of combat. And he's part of an old barracks called the Ebon Blades. When you engage the service of the Ebon Blades, you get quality work. That is the rule. And it's so cool, man. I love Grog as a character. I think a lot of the other characters, Hatcher, Burke, freaking Provincial, they're all so good. I love the cast of this book. I thought some of the scenes were very interesting. And because Grog is largely, to me, just a piece that allows me to get into the head of a character, I don't really care that the plot's a little loosely structured. I was mostly just there for the characters, and I had a fun time with that. Again, also, the narrator on the first book does such a phenomenal job. because he's just in character the whole time, and it's great. A lot of books start off with really great, solid sentences. Warbreaker is, it's funny, Vashra thought. How often my stories start with me getting thrown into prison or something like that. Mistborn, it's like ash fell from the sky. Or Stormlight, you have Zeth Sun Bolano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was to kill a king. But Grog has one of those too. It starts from Grog's perspective is Burke was talking about freedom again. And it's so good! I love it! It's great. Again, I just wish the later books had audiobooks I could listen to that were not AI, because I can't stand the sound of AI voices. They do not sound like people to me. B tier, though, because again, very solid story. I wish there was more that I could actually engage with. Bit of a change of pace. We have some nonfiction. This is Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. And this book is a very powerful read. I find it hard to rank this any lower than S. Just because, it's a very potent look into someone's life. And I may not enjoy nonfiction as a rule that much. But as someone who, grew up watching the TV shows where Jeanette McCurdy starred, it's very potent and powerful getting to hear her story of what she went through, going through making the entertainment that we all grew up with. And honestly, it's a very important journey to go on, I think. If you're interested in reading the book, if you grew up with these shows, because it gives you a lot of insight. And I also, I'm a huge fan of getting to hear people heal and hearing the processes people go through to heal. And Jeanette's story has a lot of really interesting and very powerful parts. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but she did narrate the entire book herself. She did a good job. She's clearly not a narrator by profession because she read very fast, but I still think she did just fine. It's not that long of a read either, so if you have time for it, give it a shot. It's a good book. Next up on our list. Oh god, we're going to do more Sanderson. So, we'll start with the Mistborn trilogy, and after that, we'll do a different series, and then we'll do Wax and Wane. So, this is the Final Empire, I think. Right? Is that which book this is? I'm looking over the list to make sure that the Final Empire didn't get put in a different place on the list, because I want to place these properly. Let me move Hero of Ages up. I can't tell if that's Well of Ascension or Final Empire, though. I think it's Final Empire. Where the hell is Well of Ascension? Where is it? Somewhere. There it is. Okay, yeah, okay. This is the Mistborn trilogy. Mistborn is part of the same shared universe as Elantris. Well, sort of. Because they're not on the same world, but they are in the same universe. So, let's start with Mistborn 1, The Final Empire. This book was so goddamn cool when I started reading it that I thought it was going to be one of my favorites ever. Like, just from the very beginning. This is top of S tier. It's an incredible book. It has some very, very powerful storytelling in it. Very, very powerful moments. Great characters. Excellent magic system. Mistborn's magic system is called Allomancy. And it's where you burn metals inside of your freaking body, and you get superpowers depending on which metal your body can burn. Like steel gives you the ability to push metal outside of you. Iron gives you the ability to pull metal toward you. Bronze, it lets you sense other allomancers. Copper lets you disguise yourself from other allomancers, and also applies to other people around you. Gold lets you look at your own future. Atium lets you look at the future around you a couple seconds into the future. It's so cool. Atium, by the way, is a fictional metal in this universe. But yes, Final Empire is an incredible book. It's basically about a young girl named Vin who gets found by another Mistborn like her. And Mistborn are allomancers that have all of the metal powers. And it basically goes on as Kelsier, the man who effectively adopts Vin, decides to truly start an effort to overthrow the Empire And in the process, he is trading Vin and using her as part of the plan to overthrow it. It's phenomenal. This story has some really great world building and has some awesome, effective scenes in it. And I love the characters, and the magic system is so goddamn cool. So Final Empire gets to be number one on S tier for now. Well of Ascension. I'm putting this below Grog, and the reason I'm putting it below Grog is because there is one specific plot point in this book that bothers the living hell out of me. I will say that it's still a very good story. It has some very effective moments. I think that the twists at the end are very powerful and very, very, very surprising, but they work. The problem I have with The Well of Ascension as a book is that it feels like the main characters are not at all thinking about how to metagame the magic system. And I don't feel like this is a spoiler because it happens so early in the book. But there is a love triangle between the main character, Vin, the clear and obvious real love interest, Elend, and the new sort of love interest, Zane. And it's very unconvincing, and Zane is clearly not stable mentally, and it does not make sense at all to me that Vin would have trouble choosing between these two people, considering that Zane traumatizes her at a couple points during the story, and Elend is just being a wonderful boyfriend the whole book. But, you know, sure, you should really struggle to choose between these two people. So yeah, Well of Ascension is B tier. It would be higher if it just wasn't for that infuriating subplot and the fact that I don't feel like the characters were trying very hard to metagame the magic. Hero of Ages gets to be in A tier. I'd say probably right there with the rest of the Fire Queen books. I like Hero of Ages quite a lot. It is a story with a lot of payoffs to setups that have been built up for the whole trilogy, and it has a very satisfying ending. I think it was a great end to the book. I don't think it was as good as the first book, but it was definitely better than book 2. And I'm happy with it. I do want to revisit it now that I know what happens, but it had some very interesting setups and payoffs. I think the only thing that made this less enjoyable for me is that I knew what happened prior to it because it was spoiled for me, but that was kind of my own fault, so whatever. Yeah. Next up, I'm going to rank a couple of my DNFs, which use these tiers exclusively. So, the first one, Michael Crichton's The Lost World. Great book. Very different from the movie. Jurassic Park: The Lost World. I will put this in DNF already read because I finished it before. Has some very cool scenes that were not replicated in the movie. For those of you who don't know, the book never leaves the island. So basically, the movie where they go back to the city, that didn't happen in the original. And there are a lot of dinosaurs that are important to the book version of this that were not in the movie at all. And honestly, it leads to a very unique experience going through and experiencing the story as it was originally written versus how it was written for the film. I really enjoy it. I go back to this one frequently. I just don't always finish it because, you know, I've already read it several times. Next DNF, Creating Character Arcs by Cam Weiland. Also very good. Very good piece of reading for writers. Very effective use of popular media like Pixar movies and Star Wars and stuff to help illustrate, you know, important concepts in writing. I've already read it, so I didn't feel the need to go all the way through it, but occasionally I go back to pieces of this just to help me kill time. And I'll do one more. Star Wars Kenobi. Amazing book. This has a good narrator. It's the same guy who narrates a lot of the Legend Star Wars books. And it is genuinely a really great piece of character fiction, and it's effectively a Star Wars Western about Kenobi when he first goes back to Tatooine after Episode 3. Great story. I love the parts with the Tusken Raiders. I love the parts about moisture farming and about the different ways that Tatooine's economy works. That being said, I did not finish it because, again, I did not have as much time as I'd like to, and I have already read this book. I know how it ends. It's very, very good. Highly recommend. All right, we'll do more Sanderson. But I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and do one of the secret projects. So, Tress of the Emerald Sea. Where is it? Here it is. I own a copy of this in real life because I found it at a bookstore for relatively cheap recently. Tress of the Emerald Sea gets to be at the top of S tier. I would say, yeah, it's better than The Final Empire. Tress of the Emerald Sea is a story that makes you feel the whimsy of it, no matter how jaded you think you are already. Tress was written as a gift to Brandon Sanderson's wife. It is part of the Secret Project books, which are basically all the books that Brandon Sanderson worked on, I think, throughout 2023. But Tress is a story of a girl who is in love with the governor's son. I think it's the governor, maybe the mayor, I'm not sure. And he doesn't know, well, he doesn't know that she knows that he's, you know, the son of this important person. And in reality, he's pretending to be a gardener, but he's not. And he gets married off to a witch across the sea, and he disappears. And Tress goes on this quest across the Emerald Sea to visit him and find him, no matter where he might have left to, because now he's missing, and she wants to know where the love of her life went. Extremely whimsical story. One of the most life. How do I describe this? It's one of the most joyful Cosmere books, I think. It has some easy to miss callbacks to other Cosmere stories, namely Elantris. But it is a very, very fun story. The twist of this is that all the oceans in this series are made up of spores that have different effects when they come in contact with water. But generally, you can't breathe in the spores, which is why sea travel is so perilous in this book. I love it. It's great. I really enjoy this series. This book. But I guess the series is just the Cosmere, but Tress is a wonderful story. I read this on my road trip. It was the first book I got through on my way over to the other corner of the country. I'm still kind of sick. I'm sorry. But I read this on my road trip. It was the first book I got through on my way to the other corner of the country, and I listened to it. Occasionally, I would play it even while my friend was headphones out, and they seemed to like it just fine. But yeah, I love this book. It's phenomenal. I really recommend it. Ow! I'm sorry. Let me take a drink of my gamer sup. Ah, shit. Okay, how long have I been streaming? I thought that OBS would have that somewhere that I could see it. Doesn't appear to, but if I look on... Oh, it only has that when I record. But if I look on YouTube, I can see that I've been streaming for an hour. Lovely! Alright, so... Next up, we're going to do a non-Sanderson thing, which is Star Wars Darth Plagueis. This is a great book. This is a really good book. I don't normally like stories from the perspective of the villain. But this is a very effective way to do it. Darth Plagueis has great pacing. It has wonderful references to the prequel trilogy. And honestly, it has some of the most interesting expansions on the Force the EU ever featured. I am putting it in S tier because the fact that it is no longer canon, in my opinion, does sully it a little bit. And I could see the politics driving someone away from this book, because I happen to like politics in my books sometimes, but I know it's not for everybody. But I will say that Plagueis had a very good narrator. He gets very into it. He's got a good voice for Plagueis. He has a good voice for Sidious. And honestly, he has a good narrator voice in general. But I love this book. Phenomenal story. I revisit it every year or two. It's really good. All right. So, Perilous Times by Thomas D. Lee. Triple S. Phenomenal book. Perilous Times is about the Knights of the Round Table coming back in the modern day as a cycle of them coming back when the world or the realm is in need of their help, only to find that the enemy they have been summoned to face is basically global warming and pollution and corporations. And it's a story that is very topical and relevant to us, but it's also far enough in the future that it can have some more tangible elements for these characters to interact with. Perilous Times is honestly one of my favorite books I gave a shot last year. I'm very happy that I did. The main characters are Lancelot and Kay, and I think both of them were done in some very interesting ways. Also, the book has a phenomenal line that I will never forget, and it's just one of the characters going, "Can someone please explain to me why Excalibur's in fucking Manchester?" And it's so phenomenal. I love it. But yeah, great book. Give it a shot. It's very, very well written, and has a good narrator too. Let's see. This is another Sanderson thing. We'll get it out of the way. The original is a short novella. I did not mean to put it there. It's good. Is a short novella by Brandon Sanderson, and I think it was a collaboration between him and a couple other writers. I don't remember. But I think this only exists as an audiobook. I think it was designed to be a good audio story and not as a book. Because I couldn't find a cover of it in book size. But I will put this at... I think I will put this above Hero of Ages. Because the original is very good. It is a very digestible experience. The audio mixing and music on it is just great. And generally, I do think the story is also extremely compelling. It's very, very well... it gets you into it very quickly. And it honestly doesn't feel as short as it is. It feels a lot more satisfying to get through than you would assume a story as short as it is. But I enjoyed it quite a lot. And I occasionally do enjoy going to shorter stories because I read a lot of very long books. And it can be refreshing every now and then to not have to read something that is 21 hours long, you know? So the original gets to be an A tier. All right, Wax and Wayne. We'll do Wax and Wayne. They're out of order, but at least they're all here. So Wax and Wayne is, and I've said this 1,000 times, and I will say it again, single-handedly the most Kino fucking book series I've ever read in my goddamn life, and every entry of it gets to be in triple S tier. Every single one is triple S. No, I will not be taking that back. Those are phenomenal books. Wax and Wayne is this sequel series to Mistborn, where I already mentioned I loved the power system. Wax and Wayne, not only is there new allomancy in this story that was not in the original trilogy, but the genre is the only way I could describe it is that the genre is a Western, noir, mystery, fantasy epic. It is the most difficult book I've ever read to describe the genre of in one singular word in the most glorious way possible. I love it. I think that Wax and Wayne is probably my favorite series I've ever read. It's incredible. Read the goddamn Cosmere. It's so good. At least read the first 3 and Wax and Wayne. The only problem I have with it is that there's some pronunciation inconsistencies in the 4th audiobook with some of the other shared universe books. If you only read Mistborn, you wouldn't even know. But if you've read the other ones, you might know. So yeah. Next up, we'll do Red Harvest. So Star Wars, Red Harvest, and Death Troopers are technically related books. Red Harvest is the first book. And it's a story of this Sith Academy where a master in pursuit of immortality accidentally creates, well, not accidentally, but on purpose, creates this zombie virus that spreads using the dark side of the Force. And it's very cool. Red Harvest has problems. Um, Namely, I think that some of the ways this story uh, handles a couple of characters are less than great. Um, but a few of the scenes in this book are genuinely terrifying. And I think that the slow buildup of dread throughout Red Harvest is worth every problem the book has. It's very, very, very good. Death Troopers is S tier. Uh, I think that Star Wars Death Troopers is one of the expanded universe books that if you're going to read any expanded universe book by itself and none of the others, this is a solid candidate. Death Troopers is phenomenal. It is audio mixed in just this hauntingly great way. Almost every Star Wars audiobook is mixed in a way that has tons of music and sound effects and stuff added in for the sake of an engaging performance. And Death Troopers does not skip that. It's very, very good. And some scenes that would only be intimidating if they were done by a regular narrator are downright horrifying when done with the sound effects. And I love it. Death Troopers is great. Very, very good book series. Book, not series. Damn it. Very, very good book. I like it much better than Red Harvest. I think Red Harvest was good, but Death Troopers is way better. All right. So the next thing it says is Dawn Shard, but the Stormlight books are all out of order, and I kind of want to do them close to last, so we'll do a bit more of nonfiction. Too Much and Never Enough by Mary Trump. This is the book that the Orange Man's niece wrote, and good book. I will not talk extensively about it because, you know, I'm a VTuber, and I don't want to spend too much time on politics here, but very, very enlightening book. I listen to this again every now and then just because it honestly has a lot of parallels with my own family in the story in ways that when I first read it, when it was new, it didn't even have some of those yet. But I'm a huge fan of this book. I haven't read a lot of Mary's work. I've read the 2 books that are on here and basically nothing else. That being said, I do think that reading these was a good call on my part. So I will put this in S tier. Very important read. It's too real for me to say it's one of my favorites, because I don't, as a rule, like revisiting depressing stuff that much. But it's a good book. The Reckoning... This book's harder because it's not as topical as the other one was. And again, it's still a very depressing book. I'd say The Reckoning belongs somewhere between B and A tier. I'll put it in B tier. B tier is being a very large category right now. But I think that's fair. Because The Reckoning is still a good book. I don't think Mary's writing got any worse or anything between books. I just think that it's not as important to me as the first one was. It feels like it's trying to be a sequel to Too Much and Not Enough, or Too Much and Never Enough, but it doesn't have the same gas behind it the first one did. Doesn't make it a bad book, doesn't make it any less important, and it sheds a lot of light on some important history stuff that I was happy to learn about. Matter of fact, I'll put The Reckoning in A tier. It can be an A tier. I think that's fair for it. It needs to be lower than this, I think, but this is fine. For the next one, what do I want to handle next? I think I have a lot of Sanderson left on this list. I think I'll go ahead and do the other 2 Secret Project books. Well, at least I'll do one of them. The Sunlit Man. This is a Secret Project book you absolutely have to have read Stormlight Archive to get. And you should honestly preferably have read most of the Cosmere by the time you get to this book. Sunlit Man, triple S. Very good. This is one of my favorite pieces of the Cosmere. It's a wonderful character piece. It's much more digestible than a lot of Sanderson's other novels because it's not quite as long. But I very much enjoy The Sunlit Man. I think it's a very powerful book about forgiving yourself and about trauma and about making a better version of yourself out of a shit situation. And it has some awesome expansions on the existing magic systems of these different worlds. It has its own new magic. There's some great art that gets included with the book. If you have the audiobook version, you can find it all on Sanderson's website. The narrator does a great job. In fact, the narrator does a better job with this specific character's voice than I think the series he is from did. Just because the series that he is from, I don't think they tried very hard to do what the text described his voice to be. This one did. But I loved this book. It's phenomenal. And I just reread it again not that long ago for this year. I still love it just as much now as I did before. It's one of the books I read on the road trip. I enjoyed it quite a lot. It was also a pleasant surprise for me because I think it came out very close to when I did the road trip. But yeah. Next up, I'll save Yumi and the Nightmare Painter for last. We'll do a few DNFs. The Witcher. Blood of Elves. I did not mean to put that in C tier. This is a DNF. Look, I like the show. I don't think this book is for me. I've mentioned before that when I'm not reading a book to read about sex, I dislike when sex is used as a crutch for when the author has nothing interesting to say. And these books are too horny. They are way too horny. I'm not into them, man. They are also very long-winded. There's a very super long introduction to the Blood of Elves that doesn't even directly feature the main characters. And, yeah, no. Pacing's not amazing. Maybe I just wasn't ready for it. The narrator does a decent enough job, but I don't know, man. Maybe I need to give this another try at some point, but I don't currently intend to, so I'm putting it in the bottom tier. After that, we're going to have The 11th Plague. I've read this before. The 11th Plague is a very good, very digestible story by Jeff Hirsch, and it's about the world after another pandemic takes out a massive part of the population. It's not a recent book. This book is very old. It came out in I want to say 2009. I don't know for sure what year it came out in, but it's definitely not a recent book. The 11th Plague is something I listened to when I was still in middle school for the first time. And revisiting it as an adult, it is aged very well. There's a reason I remembered some of the scenes in it so well. The only thing I would say is that the pacing gets a little slow in the middle part of the book, which is hard to do when the story isn't even that long to begin with, but it's still a very good book. And I think it has some very good gems in it. So 11th Plague gets to be already read because I already finished it once. Revenge of the Sith, I'm putting this at the top of DNF already read. Phenomenal audiobook. Like I mentioned, the Star Wars books are usually fully mixed, and it is a very, very, very good novelization. It has some plot elements in it that the original movie maybe didn't drop, but didn't expand upon quite as much. And if you really love EU Star Wars, this is the best, Legend Star Wars that exists. This is phenomenal book. And it's part of the reason I really warmed up to episode 3 again at some point in time. But yeah, I love this book. Phenomenal story. Definitely give it a try. Then Aragon. I don't know where the hell to put this, because I've already finished Aragon, but the thing is, I didn't finish it last year, I finished it this year. Before that, I had never finished Aragon, so I don't know whether to put it in Will Try Again, or Already Read. I am unsure which of these two spots this belongs in. I'm going to put it in Will Try Again, but for context, I have already read this, and it's good. I like Aragon quite a lot. Aragon has a very interesting soft hard magic system. It's like a hybrid. I think the book itself has slightly rougher writing than a lot of other popular fantasy, but what's nice about it is that I can feel every word of this story oozing the enthusiasm that Paolini clearly had for his own book series. There's one thing I love about Aragon and the inheritance cycle. It's just how much love you can feel in this book. So yes, I do strongly recommend Aragon to fantasy enjoyers. I just don't know whether to put it in DNF already read or DNF will try again, because I did not finish it this year. I started it this year. My loan expired before I finished the book. The same thing happened to me in the middle of reading Eldest, and the same thing happened again in the middle of reading Murtagh, and I still haven't finished Murtagh, and I'm very angry about it because I like this book series. But yeah, I like the first Aragon book. I'm gonna put it in Will Try Again, but for context, this would probably be going in like B or A tier if I was actually ranking it. Magnus Chase, Book 1, The Sword of Summer. I'll put this in Will Try Again, but if I ever try it again, it'll be in the text version. The reason I did not finish this is because I did not like the narrator very much. It's nothing personal with the narrator. I think he's doing an okay job, but he's a kid. And a lot of audiobooks narrated by kids don't sound that convincing to adults. I prefer even when kid audiobooks are narrated by teenagers or young adults, because I feel like they do a more faithful job at reading emotion into the lines instead of reading like a kid would most of the time. So The Sword of Summer, I'd say, is a will try again, but I'd be trying again with the text version. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I've already read this, and I'm putting it in DNF already read for that reason. To be clear, if this was my first time with the book, it would have been going here. Maybe here, for the same reason as Sword of Summer. But the reason why is because Ballad was read by a narrator who did not sound like he cared at all for a decent portion of the book. I think that was just his voice, and I don't want to be mean, and please, if you're listening to this, Mr. Narrator, don't think I'm disrespecting you. I've listened to this book before. It's just that I had trouble this time around is all. I thought it was a good book with a good story. I think the movie is honestly more worth your time than this. I like the movie quite a lot, and I have since revisited the book a little bit. I don't think that the audiobook is for me anymore, but the movie was incredible. They did a very good job adapting most of it, so I think that you can honestly just watch the movie again and you'll be fine. Yeah. Now we've ranked all the DNFs. We're just on to the books I actually finished. I need to drink some more of my Gamer Sups. Please sponsor me whenever I hit 50,000 subscribers, Gamer Sups. All right. Anyway. So, next off, we're going to do a couple of Sanderson one-offs. Warbreaker. I am between putting Warbreaker in A tier and putting Warbreaker in S tier. It's not triple S, but I think that the story behind this book gets it into S tier. Warbreaker is published in Creative Commons, which means that the online version of the book you can read on Brandon Sanderson's website is available for free. You don't have to pay for it ever. And I think that was an incredibly cool move on Brandon Sanderson's part. What's even cooler is that he's literally said, hey, if you want to print your own copy of this book, go ahead. So I'm a huge fan of authors taking that kind of approach to books. I think that someone as popular as Sanderson can get away with it. And Warbreaker is a phenomenal story in its own right. It is a story split up between two sisters, one of whom is being married off to the god king of another country in order to prevent war, the other of whom sneaks into that country to try and save her sister. And the third main character is one of the gods of that pantheon who does not believe in his own divinity. It's a great book. I really enjoy Warbreaker. I reread it recently. The graphic audio adaptation is phenomenal. They have some very good casting in that. But I would say overall that Warbreaker is one of my favorite Cosmere pieces. It is not my favorite Cosmere piece. I think it would be an A tier if not for the fact that I think it being published in Creative Commons is so goddamn cool. But yeah, great story. Next is going to be, we'll do White Sand, which is another Sanderson thing, technically. White Sand is a graphic novel, but there's a graphic audio adaptation of it. And technically, there's a version of White Sand in the Cosmere collection, which is this little short story collection here. But that version is incomplete and does not have the entire story. White Sand's graphic audio adaptation has the canon complete version of the story. There are some non-canon differences in the short story collection version of the story that are not actually canon. The graphic audio version is fully canon. So I would rank these, because it's really just one book split into three, so I'm going to give them all the same ranking. I would probably rank these in A tier, I think. The graphic audio adaptation does them a lot of favors, because I think having the audio version of characters is always more convincing. And I'm a huge fan of some of the subversions this series commits to. I do think the pacing gets a bit slow in the middle, but I also think that, it probably wouldn't be as big of an issue if it was a comic and not an audio adaptation, and that's what this was supposed to be. So I'm not going to give it too much shit. I think A tier is fair. So we're going to rank those there. I really enjoy this. It's about this world where the sun and the moon never change places. And basically, one side of the planet is fully in daytime all the time, and the other side is fully in darkness all the time. And I think that's just so cool. And it leads to some very cool, different cultural differences. The main character is a Daysider with the magic of Dayside, which is sand manipulation, called Sand Mastery. And the other side of that world doesn't have that magic. The main character's mother is from the other side, and his magic is weaker than anyone else's on Dayside. And he tries to become a Sandmaster at the Sandmaster Academy, at the DM. And he is initially denied ranks for years and years and years, but because of the rules of the DM, if he doesn't accept a low rank, he can't be forced to. So he keeps refusing promotion because he's not satisfied with the rank he's getting. And eventually he's like, screw you guys, I'm going to take the test for the highest possible rank. And although the test does not guarantee him an advancement, it would be stupid of the people who run this academy to not advance him if he passes the Master's Path. So it's a very cool story. It uses its magic system in a way that is very, very creative and innovative. And I like the ways in which the magic system shifts and changes over the course of the story. It was also very cool seeing the canon version of the story versus the original short story. And I like that quite a lot. Again, A tier for this. In fact, Reckoning gets to be below these. Next up, we'll do Tales from the Gas Station. So Tales from the Gas Station is the other creepypasta on this list. It started as a creepypasta, and then eventually it became a novel series, and the novels are really, really, really good. They are horror comedy, which is a genre mashup I did not know I loved until I first started reading these. But they are all phenomenal. Volume 1 is the classic. You can't go wrong with that. It's an S-tier story. Volume 2 is, let's see, where is this? Right here. This one, also very good. These two contain a lot of the story as it stands up until the end of where the creepypasta version of the story ends. Volume 3 is the book that contains a lot of stuff that was later erased from the internet and eventually made for a very, very, very satisfying comeback in the form of a novel. I will say that ranking these books, Volume 3 is probably the best. And I think Volume 2 is the weakest and Volume 1 is the second best. But I like these books quite a lot. Volume 4 is the end of the series as we currently know it. There are no more books coming out, but there is one other book that came out beforehand, which is like a shorter story. I'll talk about it. Volume 4, though, it's hard for me to rank it. I love endings, though, and this had a very good one. I'll rank Volume 4 at the top. It gets to be the number one. Then we have Bedside Manor, which is another Tales from the Gas Station book. I will rank this at the bottom of A tier. And the reason I'm putting this below any of the other Tales from the Gas Station books is that Bedside Manor, as it is published officially, is literally indistinguishable from the version online. And I don't recommend that people purchase this book unless they want to support the original author by doing so, because you will not be getting anything you cannot get through the online version of it. And personally, I respect that publishing it gives, another part of the resume for the author. I don't have any confusion about why it was published this way, but I do personally like it better as just listening to the narration because it doesn't cost me money to do so. And these are all Audible exclusives, so unless you want to listen to the creepypasta versions, which again for Bedside Manor are indistinguishable from the published version, you have to buy them through Audible. I don't like giving Amazon more money than they deserve, so yeah. But anyway, good books, all 5 good books. MCP is a very good narrator. Okay, we're at a point where all we really have left is Ark of a Scythe and Stormlight Archive. So we'll talk about Stormlight Archive, then we'll talk about Ark of a Scythe, and I'll end on the last book I read last year, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which I finished, I believe, on New Year's Eve. So, basically, the Stormlight Archive begins at The Way of Kings, but I did not read that last year, I read it the year before. So we're going to go immediately to Words of Radiance, which I believe is top of S tier. I think the only things I'd put above it are Final Empire and Tress. In fact, I'd put it above Final Empire. I would not put it above Tress. Tress is wonderful, but I would put Words of Radiance at near the top of S tier. Words of Radiance is one of the best Cosmere books. It is so epic. It is so grand. The characters have such wonderful moments throughout it. And I just personally really enjoy a lot of the big moments in the Stormlight Archive. I have read it online before that people say, this book makes you cheer. And it's true. The Stormlight Archive does make you do that. It is this epic world where the world is basically oriented around this weather phenomenon called high storms, which are just these crazy powerful storms that can rip buildings out of the ground. It's basically like if every storm was a hurricane. And it's so cool. And the ecology of this world with all the different like crustacean-based life and the grass that grows out of stone and can retract itself. It's so cool. I love the Stormlight Archive. The main character, Kaladin Stormblessed, is a former soldier turned slave. And I don't want to spoil too much because talking about the events of Book 1 might spoil... talking about the events of Book 2 might spoil Book 1. But Book 2 is very much Kaladin's book. And I'm a huge fan of some of the things he gets to do in this story. Book 3, Oathbringer. I'm a huge fan. Oathbringer, triple S. Yeah, top of triple S. Oathbringer might be my favorite book ever. It is the third book in the Stormlight Archive, and it is largely Dalinar's book. Dalinar is this old grizzled general in the first book, who is one of the main three leads of this series. And in book 3, he goes through this arc of his clouded memories that he's had for years of his life that he used an old forbidden magic to erase start coming back to him. And he has to forgive himself for a lot of horrible things he did when he was a very different person. And it's such a phenomenal book. There are some great quotes from it. At risk of spoiling it, I will say that there is a quote from it that has basically changed my life. I won't say the quote, but if you've read the book, you know which one I'm talking about. The only hint I will give is, what is the most important step a man can take? And if you know, you know. I'll probably say it at a different point in different videos, but I won't say it here because I don't want to spoil anything. The fourth book is The Rhythm of War, and this is very much Shallan's book. Shallan is the third main character of the Stormlight Archive, and she is the female lead of the series. And I think Rhythm of War is phenomenal for how it expands the magic system. I love Kaladin's subplot. I really enjoy some of the political stuff in this book. And I like that the perspective on Dalinar's part of the story largely shifts over to Navani, who is his love interest. But that being said, I do think Rhythm of War is one of the weaker parts of the Stormlight Archive. It's still an S tier book. I would say it's bottom of S tier. Rhythm of War is mostly notable for how Cosmere aware it is. There's a lot of references to the shared universe that I did not understand when I first read Rhythm of War. And I reread it this year as well, and it's such a great book. But it is a little bloated, and I do think that the pacing in some of the Shallan parts is not as bad as I thought it was when I first read it, but these books are massive, and they feel longer on a first read than they do on a second read. So I would say Rhythm of War is bottom of S tier. It's higher than A tier, but not much. All right. Break. All right, next book. Dawn Shard. This is a novella from between books 3 and 4 of the Stormlight Archive. And I'm not even going to entertain any other possibility. This is another, S tier book. I remember loving Dawn Shard because I think the main characters are very well chosen. It uses 2 characters that are normally side characters in the Stormlight Archive, one of whom is one of the men under Kaladin's command named goddammit, I know this, Lopen. And the other is a character from the side interludes from the middle of the books named Risen. And it's just this great book. And I didn't mean to place the 2 books that have a lot of sea ship-faring stuff on them right next to each other, but screw it, it happened. But yeah, Dawn Shard is a much more digestible book. It's called a Cosmere novella. The thing is, though, it's really a novel. It's 7 or 8 hours long. It's not a novella, but Sanderson calls it a novella because it's much shorter than his typical book. It could easily be passed as a novel, and if the Alcatraz books, which are all shorter than this one, count as novels, this is a novel. But still very good. Much more digestible than most of the other Cosmere books. I love the cover. I want to buy a copy at some point. The only thing that's been preventing me is just lack of funds. But I love the Stormlight Archive, and this is, in my opinion, the better of the 2 novellas. I'll talk about the other one here in a second. The last Brandon Sanderson book before we get to the Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is the Cosmere Collection, Arcanum Unbounded. And I think this is above... Okay. Here's my thing. This would be a triple S book. Edge Dancer. I think that Cosmere Collection is a very strong set of short stories, some of which are wonderful. And then we get to the Hope of Elantris, which has a lot of pronunciation inconsistencies with other books. And you get to Edge Dancer, which is very long and not a particularly great fit with some of the other stories in the collection. And I think that this gets to be A tier. I'd put it above White Sand. I'd put it above Bastille. Would I put it above these? No, I think that's a comfortable place for it. Yeah, Arcanum Unbound is incredible, and I listen to it a lot, but the problem is that the short stories are of a much notably higher quality than Edge Dancer, in my opinion. Edge Dancer is bloated with the perspective of one character whose narration gets tiring after a little while. I think that Lift is a great character, and she's wonderful as a side character, as an occasional perspective that is interrupted by other characters. I don't think she makes for a compelling 6 to 8 hour long novel protagonist. And again, Edge Dancer's called a novella. It's not one. It's a novel. It's only a novella compared to the Stormlight Archive books. So I would say that because of Edge Dancer, I'm putting Arcanum Unbounded in A tier. Let's be clear that Edge Dancer would have been C tier and the rest of Arcanum Unbounded would have been triple S. And the only reason I would have put Arcanum Unbounded in S is because of the fact that Arcanum Unbounded has inconsistencies with one of its short stories and pronunciations between stories. But this also contains Mistborn Secret History, which is a great read. My favorite short stories in this were originally White Sand, although I do kind of prefer the graphic audio version of that story now. Aside from that, probably my favorite short story in the collection is either The 11th Metal, which is a Mistborn prequel story, which is originally part of the tabletop role-playing game manuals, and I really enjoy The Emperor's Soul. That's probably my favorite part of the collection. And I actually have both the graphic audio version of that and the regular audiobook. I think the graphic audio version's better. The regular audiobook's still incredible. Because Kate Redding is the same narrator that does most of the female perspective books in the Cosmere, and she does a phenomenal job with The Emperor's Soul. I just think that the graphic audio adaptation adds a lot to the other characters, and as much as I love Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, it's difficult to beat graphic audio adaptations sometimes. There's a reason that they're hella expensive if you don't find them on like audiobooks.com or something. But yeah, I love the Cosmere collection. Very good set of short stories. I love the little blurbs about the planets and the different systems and stuff. I just wish that the pronunciations were consistent with Elantris and that Edge Dancer was better. I'm sorry, Edge Dancer. I'm sorry. But yeah. Now we're left with two things. First of which is Ark of a Scythe. Scythe is one of my favorite books of all time. It's triple S favorites. I think that Scythe is a very powerful, very atmospheric book. It is the best of its trilogy by far. I don't think the second or third book ever come close to being as good as how good the first one is. But the one problem I have with Scythe is that nothing, it's great. Anyway, but no, seriously, it's got a really good audiobook. It's got this potent question of like life and death and how do we solve the problem of that in a world where death is no longer an equation. Basically, death has been defeated in this story, and there's a massive, omnipotent, powerful AI called the Thunderhead that runs most governmental functions in the future world that they live in, but it refuses to have a hand in death. It does not want to be the malevolent storm cloud that people see it to be. So it allows humanity to choose how they will handle the problem of overpopulation. Humanity decides to come up with a second government called the Scythedom, which trains people to effectively kill a certain number of citizens per year in order to keep the population curbed. in the absence of functional space programs or anything that can get people off planet to handle overpopulation. Scythe is a great book. I think the first book is the best one in the series, and the characters are wonderful. Rowan and Citra are a phenomenal pair of protagonists. I've heard people say that the romance between them isn't very convincing. I don't know that I believe that. I kind of like them together, but yeah, very, very good series. I strongly recommend this to anyone who enjoys reading a lot, because the first book is incredible. The second one, though, Thunderhead is still S tier. Thunderhead is still very good. I think Thunderhead is a very good book. I think the only thing that makes Thunderhead less good is that I know what happens after it, and like many people, I was not a massive fan of Book 3. I like Book 3. Book 3 is not bad. Knowing what happens in retrospect, because this was a reread, I've read the entire series like 3 times now. But knowing what happens in retrospect, Book 3 is not great. And Book 2, I see a lot of setup in Book 2 that I missed my first time around that makes it a bit more enjoyable. It's still S tier. I would not put it higher than that. I'd put it bottom of S tier. Rhythm of War is better. The Toll, B tier. Look, okay? The Toll, good book. Not better than good. It finishes the trilogy in a way that is very weird. And looking back on it, reading this trilogy again from the perspective of knowing how it ends, I can sort of see how one gets from Scythe to Thunderhead to the Toll. And Grayson Tolliver, the character that basically takes over as the main character in the third and second books, is a good character. But I don't enjoy how much the main characters from the first book get sidelined in the sequels. I won't spoil too much, but I will say that if you went into Book 2 expecting a lot of Rowan and Citra, or expecting a lot of Michael Faraday, or any of the other characters from Book 1, don't. They are barely a factor in the sequels. And to be honest, I don't mind Books 2 and 3, but that's mainly just because I like Grayson as a character. And Jericho, the non-binary character that gets introduced in the third book, I think they're fluid, technically, gender fluid, is also wonderful. I love Jericho. But Books 2 and 3 feel like they're telling a completely different story from Book 1. And that does kind of take them down a notch, in my estimation. Alright, so the final Arc of a Scythe book is called Gleanings, and it is a collection of short stories, anthology in the same universe. And I would say that it is better than Thunderhead. I think I like Gleanings more than I like Rhythm of War. Do I, though? I'll put it above Rhythm of War, but only just. Gleanings has... No, you know what? It goes below, because there are parts of Gleanings that I do not like, and there are parts of it that I love. I like every part of it. I just don't love every part of it, I should say. Gleanings is a very good collection of short stories in the Arc of a Scythe universe. And they're from all over the timeline. Some of them are from after the trilogy ends. Some of them are from the middle of it. Some of them are from before the trilogy even begins. And most of the stories are phenomenal. I think the ones narrated by the same author that did the original series are the best. There is a story from the perspective of Citra's brother. There is a story from the perspective of a bunch of art students from the beginning of when the whole Scythedom thing was established. And that story is incredible. And there is another story narrated by Fiona Hardingham, who I love. She does a wonderful job. She has a very pleasant voice. And that one's extremely British in the most charming way. But I think that Gleanings is the only book that came after the first one that replicated what I like about Book 1. And that is the atmosphere. The atmosphere of Book 1 is so melancholic and so real. It makes you fear for the characters. It makes you want them to succeed. It makes you love them. And I feel like the only one that ever got close to doing that again was Gleanings. I don't think The Toll or Thunderhead ever did as good of a job at that as the first book did. Gleanings is the only sequel that I think ever came close to that. It is the second best book by a mile. You know what? I think that with that said, Thunderhead should probably be knocked down to A tier. Because, yeah, now that I'm looking at this again, I do think Thunderhead's more of an A tier than an S tier. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me in retrospect to rank Gleanings above it, but to still have Gleanings be below Rhythm of War if they're on the same tier. Gleanings should be below Rhythm of War, but I think that Thunderhead needs to be a tier below Gleanings because Gleanings is way better. I actually own a signed copy of this book, and I'm very happy that I do because Gleanings is my second favorite book in the series, and I quite enjoy Schusterman's work. So yeah, Gleanings gets to be an S tier, very bottom of S tier. Finally, we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Shit. Okay, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I am struggling with where in S tier to place this. I will put it just below Words of Radiance. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is the last book I read last year. I read it on New Year's Eve while I was doing a really long shift. And it is a phenomenal book. Yumi is much like Tress in the sense that it is a book that fills you with wonder and with a love for literature that I don't think a lot of other books accomplish. It is also a dual effort by both Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. They each take turns narrating from the perspectives of Yumi and the main character, Painter, respectfully. Yes, he does go by Painter. But I love these books. The secret projects were all phenomenal. I eventually did read the fourth one in 2024. I will not talk about it here, though. Yumi is about this world where in one side of the equation, you have Painter's World, which is a book stuck in eternal night where these shadow monsters called nightmares wander around. And nightmare painters have to go around with special ink and bamboo, special ink and paper, and they paint patterns that match the shape of the nightmare to contain them before the nightmares can evolve to become strong enough to hurt people. And on the other side of it, you have Yumi's world, where she is this priestess who is very special because she is incredibly good at attracting spirits and getting them to listen to her will. And basically, Yumi and Painter, your name style, keep waking up in each other's bodies. But unlike your name, in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, they wake up and they see each other, but only one of them can operate their body at a time. Whenever Yumi is in Painter's world, everyone else sees Yumi, but in reality, she is piloting Painter's body. In Yumi's world, whenever Painter wakes up, he is not only operating her body, but to everyone else, he looks like her. So it's this interesting thing where Yumi has to find a good cover story to live in Painter's world, and Painter has to find a good way to live Yumi's life convincingly. And it's just such a great book. There's a blurb at the end where Sanderson talks about how he literally wrote this. I can't remember if Tress or Yumi was the one that was based on a prompt from his wife. I know they were both gifts to her. But he directly talks about how your name partly inspired the gimmick here. And it's so cool. I love Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Phenomenal story. Definitely close to top of S tier. So, that is every single book that I read in 2023, including at least most of my DNFs. I am tired, and my voice is worn out. I need to eat food. I have rice in my cooker that has been done for like how long have I been streaming this? An hour and 15 minutes. So, yeah. I am going to go do that. For anyone who is actually still hanging out in the chat, thank you for watching as long as you did. I really appreciate it. For anyone watching this later, I love you too. And I'm going to try and hopefully make either some shorts out of this or maybe a longer trimmed video. I don't know. We'll see what I have time to do soon. But thank you guys so much for being here. And I hope to talk more about books in the future. Maybe I'll do some shorter pieces about how much I love specific stories. With that being said, I am out.